You've probably heard it 1,000 times by now. Fail fast. It's everywhere. If you spent any time at all reading about startups, corporate strategy, or just innovation in general over the last decade, this phrase is completely inescapable. We're living in this ecosystem that is absolutely obsessed with speed. We're constantly told we need to sprint, to iterate, to just ship products before they're even ready, and to wear our failures like some ultimate badge of honor. But before we just run headfirst into disaster, we really need to hit pause. In today's explainer, we're going to unpack this massive cultural buzzword to see what failing fast actually means and whether it's always the right move.
Because it really brings up a massive core tension for us. In a world obsessed with speed, is moving fast always the answer? Think about that classic Silicon Valley mantra we all know: move fast and break things. I mean, sure, it sounds exciting, right? It sounds disruptive and revolutionary. But when you actually break things out in the real world, the consequences aren't always just a little glitch on your computer screen. Sometimes breaking things means breaking consumer trust, destroying reputations, or even worse. So we really have to challenge this buzzword right out of the gate. Is this mentality actually a reliable recipe for success, or is it just a fast-track path to catastrophe that's wearing a clever disguise?
To get to the bottom of that, let's dramatically slow our pace for a second. I want to introduce a guiding philosophy from Papa Cubair. He's the late father of our newsletter's author, Papa, and he was a man who really represented careful, traditional wisdom. He used to have this saying, "Slow is smooth and smooth is fast." You might know this as the speed paradox. It essentially tells us that rushing causes friction and friction causes mistakes, and those mistakes, they ultimately slow you down. By taking the time to execute smoothly and carefully, you actually arrive at your destination much faster. Now that feels completely counterintuitive to our modern fail-fast culture, doesn't it?
To help ground us in reality here, let's bring in Colonel Debs, Papa's spouse and a consistent voice of steady reason. She reminds us that fail fast didn't actually start out as some reckless business slogan. Its roots are deep in 1990s software and hardware engineering. Originally, a fail-fast system was a strict safety safeguard. It was a deliberate design choice where a system would immediately shut down the very second it detected a flaw. And why did they do that? To prevent subtle, cascading damage or corrupted data. It had absolutely nothing to do with celebrating failure. It was a highly disciplined, controlled mechanism to contain a failure before it could do any real harm.
But over time, this concept mutated into something else entirely. We started in the 90s with that disciplined engineering safeguard. Then, as the internet economy absolutely exploded in the 2000s, the phrase got hijacked by startup folklore. The context completely shifted. It went from stopping broken systems to just throwing unfinished ideas at the wall to see what stuck. It became a Silicon Valley badge of honor. You had famous entrepreneurs like Elon Musk claiming that if things aren't failing, you simply aren't innovating enough. And today, it's mutated into a mainstream buzzword that's honestly often used to justify sloppy work or a total lack of planning. It's completely divorced from its original protective meaning.
The absolutely crucial point here is understanding exactly when failing fast makes sense and when it's a complete disaster. It all comes down to a very stark contrast: reversible decisions versus irreversible decisions. If you're just releasing a minor update to a smartphone app or maybe testing out a new marketing slogan on social media, the stakes are incredibly low. That is a reversible decision. You can roll it back in an hour and no one gets hurt. But what if you're designing a nuclear power plant? What if you're building a medical device or the flight controls of a commercial jet? Those are irreversible choices. The stakes are monumental, and rushing into failure in those contexts isn't innovation, it's just negligence.
And unfortunately, we have seen the dark side of rushing blindly into the unknown. When organizations fail to distinguish between reversible and irreversible decisions, the results can be truly tragic. Take a look at these two cautionary tales. First, Microsoft released their Tay AI chatbot onto social media as a rapid experiment. The result? Massive brand damage and public backlash when it almost immediately adopted highly toxic behaviors. But an even more severe example is the Boeing 737 MAX tragedy. They attempted to accelerate development, minimize changes, and rely on rapid software fixes without doing a fundamental, careful redesign. That led to inadequate testing and, tragically, fatal crashes. This is exactly what happens when the fail-fast ethos is inappropriately applied to safety-critical, irreversible domains.
So instead of blindly sprinting forward, I want you to picture yourself navigating a dark, dense forest. Science, business, innovation, they all exist in this unsettled, unpredictable landscape. The path is never clear. Now, if you just run as fast as you can into that dark forest, you're absolutely going to crash into a tree or fall off a cliff. But if you use small, controlled experiments, kind of like holding out a small lantern, you illuminate just enough of the path ahead to take the next safe step. You are still moving forward, but you are doing it with vision, care, and purpose.
Interestingly enough, biology perfectly illustrates this exact concept. Nature has developed two very distinct strategies for survival over millions of years. First, we have what's called R-selection. This is the strategy of producing many offspring with very little investment in each, just hoping a few of them survive. This works brilliantly in harsh, unpredictable environments, much like a highly volatile startup market, where you can afford to run a ton of cheap experiments. On the other hand, we have K-selection. This is producing very few offspring, but investing massive resources to nurture and protect them. This is what's required for resource-heavy, irreversible decisions. The environment you're in dictates the strategy you must use. You simply cannot apply an R-selection fail-fast strategy to a K-selection reality. It just doesn't work.
And this biological reality brings us directly to how successful modern organizations manage this exact same dynamic. Academic research into knowledge-intensive small to medium enterprises, these are companies operating in highly dynamic, complex markets, shows that successful firms don't just fail blindly. They don't just throw things at the wall. They have a highly structured process for organizational learning. They actually harness failure as a tool for evolution rather than destruction. You see, it's not about the failure itself. It's about the meticulous, deliberate system they build to extract every drop of knowledge from that failure.
This true learning process relies on three absolutely crucial phases. Step 1 is failure recognition. You have to actually identify the fault and culturally accept it without trying to sweep it under the rug. Step 2 is interactive sense-making. This is where the team comes together to interpret what happened, absolutely devoid of blame. It's a pure, objective analysis of the data. And finally, Step 3 is organizational adaptation. This means actually changing your internal resources, your processes, and your behaviors so that this specific failure never ever happens again. If you fail fast but you skip these 3 steps, you aren't innovating. You're honestly just failing.
So, we really need to reframe this whole mantra. It shouldn't just be fail fast. The actual goal is to fail smart, fail small, and fail forward. The key isn't raw speed. It's about constructing portfolios of small, safe-to-fail stepping stone experiments. You want to isolate the risk so that when a failure does happen, and it will, it's just a minor bump in the road, not a catastrophic explosion that takes down the whole company. By keeping the experiment small and smart, you maximize your learning while completely containing the downside risk. You're still moving fast, but you're moving with calculated precision.
If we pull all these threads together, a really clear philosophy emerges for us. First, always contain the downside risk. Make sure any failure is cheap and survivable. Second, never rush irreversible choices. You have to treat them with the deep respect and planning they demand before executing. Third, train your entire team to think in controlled experiments rather than binary, black and white successes or failures. And finally, don't just standardize your products, standardize exactly how your organization learns from its mistakes. This framework brilliantly marries Papa Cubert's traditional smooth is fast wisdom with the very real modern necessity for rapid testing.
And that brings us to Papa's final reflective synthesis on all of this. He notes that small, controlled, rapid experiments are actually complementary to the speed paradox process. Think about that for a second. On the surface, failing fast seems contrary to the speed paradox, where slow is smooth and smooth is fast. However, when managed properly, speed can be incredibly useful if you manage failure within these controlled experiments. When you meticulously plan small, low-stakes tests, you are operating smoothly. You're avoiding the massive friction of catastrophic failures. So these managed, rapid experiments don't violate the speed paradox at all. They are the very lantern that safely and smoothly guides us forward through that dark forest.
Which leaves us with a critical question to ask ourselves today. As you look at your own projects, your own business, or even your big personal goals, are you blindly rushing into the dark hoping for the best, or are you smoothly lighting the way with smart, controlled experiments? Remember, true innovation isn't about how fast you can break things, it's about how smoothly and intelligently you can learn. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this mental model helps you smoothly navigate your next big decision.